Immortal House. Master Darkfire ruled over Limbo with Dacheldor as his head general. Few things had changed in Limbo from the previous timelines, but the two were slightly different than their counterparts had been. When Prime formally introduced himself to Dacheldor, greater change was inevitable. He did not reveal to the clone that he was an Illithal. He simply claimed to be a wraith with great magical power, who was looking to become the new apprentice of the mighty head general. After several displays of power and prognostications that helped Limbo, Dacheldor accepted Prime as his apprentice. From that position, he was able to influence Dacheldor and, through him, Darkfire. He planted the seeds for an idea to construct a location in Limbo where beings from every other realm could come. He even provided schematics on how to build portals to the other realms, so this place could allow access to the most powerful beings without them losing their abilities. The location was nicknamed the Immortal House. It was a tremendous space station nearing the size of Castle Darkfire, filled with portal devices, meeting rooms, and living quarters for species of all shapes, sizes, and physics. While inside, visitors were treated like ambassadors, but could also choose to undergo training for their bodies so they could eventually leave the Immortal House and survive in Limbo. Beings from within Limbo could travel to the Immortal House as well. It welcomed all the most powerful beings in the cosmos. The only rule everyone had to follow inside was to respect the Immortal House's owner, Master Darkfire. When they finished its construction, Darkfire and Dacheldor stayed within the Immortal House for many days, welcoming those who arrived. Prime was free to walk the station as he pleased and quickly got to know all of those who chose to remain. The most powerful of these early arrivers was Ellie, who Darmal was already well acquainted with. She openly revealed her ability to transform her body into anyone or anything. She also whispered to Prime that she knew the truth about him, but would keep his secret. The most influential person to set foot in the Immortal House was a native of Limbo named Voldar. He was head of a resistance that had grown in opposition to Darkfire, and brashly chose to reveal himself within the confines of the Immortal House. There, in accordance with their rules, he was safe from persecution by Darkfire and could voice his grievances openly. He hoped that he could do more good there than on the battlefield. Lord Vorn also made himself known to the Immortal House, revealing the Shadowfold as he did. This bold move earned him respect in Prime's eyes, and made Dacheldor begin to seriously consider him as a possible future Illithal. While there, Vorn worked to forge an alliance with Dacheldor, knowing full well he would always be seen as a rival by Darkfire, but having the Empire on his side was to his benefit. Many beings from other realms arrived, some easily as powerful as Realm Lords. Several seemed to have great potential as possible Illithal. Others were too sinister even for the tastes of Dacheldor and Prime. The most mysterious of these arrivals was a being who called himself Lithandor the Time Streamer. Cloaks and robes concealed his body, and his ability to prognosticate the future told everyone he was a time traveler like Bylon. But Bylon had no knowledge of him. His arrival caused Bylon to reveal himself to the Immortal House. Previously, he had been known only to Benji, acting as his teacher in the same way Uzulkree once had for him. Bylon kept his appearance secret, however, so others would not see the resemblance between him and his supposed student. A vampire named Timur Domonahue arrived from a realm where the living dead outnumbered the actual living. Along with a reluctant necromancer named Douglas, he described the workings of the soul and spirit of beings, and how they could be reached in a mysterious place called the Soul Stream. This place was a form of purgatory where, even after part of someone's essence had moved on to an afterlife, new incarnation, or what have you, a reflection of them remained. If drawn forth and empowered, the soul could be restored and the person brought back, or a new soul could even be created to make a new version of an old being. The Soul Stream intrigued Dacheldor. He knew only of taking souls and making them part of himself, and the history of the ancients. The idea that uncollected souls could reincarnate or move on to an afterlife fascinated him. Dacheldor did not share his interest. He had first-hand experience with the Soul Stream through Shakarok's memories, as well as from his past as a Reaper. But he did begin to wonder if an Illithal could gain access to the Soul Stream and potentially recruit beings who had died long ago. Experiments were done by Darkfire, Dacheldor, and Prime to see if portals could be constructed to the Soul Stream. It seemed plausible, but early experiments were shaky. Two beings were pulled from the Soul Stream, a skeletal sorcerer named Selek Morgo, and a long-dead knight known only as Lord Uhtred. Their arrivals corresponded to the arrival from another realm of a deity called Trixie. She claimed that her arrival was unrelated, but she was known as a goddess of death and demanded the experiments be shut down. The people of Immortal House eventually split into several factions. As they gained the ability to survive in Limbo and move about freely, they left the space station and built these factions into their own forces in Limbo. It was at that time Darkfire realized the threat he may have inadvertently brought into his realm. One faction was led by Nekru, the immortal who had once worked alongside Dacheldor. It seemed the most influential faction until it was destroyed from the inside by Ellie, who was also a member. She then went on to create her own faction, leaving Nekru to return to Dacheldor and the Limbo Imperial military. Voldar created his own faction used to bolster the resistance against the Empire, but Darmal infiltrated it. Through Darmal, Dacheldor was able to track what was going on inside and, though the Empire did not know it, he made sure it did not become a prominent threat. Even so, Voldar and his soldiers caused major devastation to the Empire's economy across many sorties. Lithandor's faction was the largest. It included the previously deceased Selek Morgo and Lord Uhtred, as well as a number of beings from across several realms. They seemed not to interfere directly with the Empire, but their actions interfered with life in Limbo in general. Lord Vorn's faction simply was the Shadowfold, and he welcomed newcomers like Timur into his home. He used the knowledge of these newcomers to spread the Shadowfold into other realms and grow his areas of influence. He was careful never to infringe upon the Empire directly with his actions. Dacheldor and Prime did not care about the influences of these factions upon Limbo. The survival of the Limbo Imperial military was not their concern. Dacheldor saw fit to remain unseen through all of it, until Lithandor's faction revealed something about itself that piqued his interests. They were working to set free an Illithel. Dacheldor finally made his presence known in Limbo, entering the Immortal House as if he was a traveler from elsewhere. He brokered alliances with all the factions, even creating his own faction that included beings he thought might be potential Illithel one day. He did not reveal the truth of what he was. In secret, his goal was to thwart Lithandor's plan and absorb the Illithel they were setting free the instant they did. When it happened, the Illithel was unleashed inside Voldar's fortress. Dacheldor invaded, making it appear as an attack against Voldar, but destroyed and captured the essence of the Illithel in the process. The cost for this was his alliances, as the others suddenly saw him as a manipulator, not a savior. Lord Vorn attacked Voldar as well, seeing the opportunity to turn many of his soldiers into powerful vampires in his ranks. Moving on him in unison with Dacheldor made this all the more devastating. He was not the only one to do this. The Limbo Imperial military struck back at the rebellion the instant this was happening. Overnight, Voldar's forces were reduced to almost nothing, and his own son was killed in the process. Daramal, taking pity on his enemy, used arcane magic to bring his son back to life, but it caused him to become a child of darkness, an eater of souls and spiritual energy. Voldar never forgave Daramal for turning his son into a monster. While Voldar worked to find a new home for him and his now ravenous son, Daramal made a pact with Ellie to join her faction. She was well aware that Daramal was partially spying on her for Dacheldor, but she did not care. She was most interested in capturing Dacheldor's attention. Ellie eventually made a deal with Dacheldor to attack Lithandor's faction together. She was very persuasive, but Dacheldor was reluctant to get involved. She then revealed some key information about who Lithandor really was, the son of Sarphasis. After discussing the matter with Darkstar, Dacheldor agreed to work alongside Ellie to destroy this faction. Lithandor did not go without a fight. It took all of the other remaining factions to take his faction down, but in the end, he could not hold against their combined power. The spoils of his faction's destruction were spread equally amongst the Empire, the Shadowfold, Ellie's faction, and Dacheldor's faction. These four factions, which would later come to be known as the factions of the Empire, the Shadow, the Chaos, and the Order, would survive for many years. Ellie's faction, the Chaos, and Dacheldor's faction, the Order, eventually became a single faction called the Order and Chaos. By the end of the Immortal House's era, Dacheldor, Prime, and Bylon had selected 6 individuals to turn into Illithel. Who these 6 were has never been recorded, but it is known that they sat in secret council with Dacheldor, Prime, and Bylon, and all 9 saw themselves as equals. People who had heard of them called them the Order of 9, or the Council of 9. They decided the true fate of the cosmos behind closed doors. The face of their decisions was Dacheldor, and he gave his proclamations from within the faction of the Order and Chaos. No one outside of the faction knew the kind of power he and the others held. Ellie was the only member to constantly question their decisions, but often she reluctantly played her role anyway. When she did not, she was rarely called on it.